Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be getting started with Bootstrap. In order to get to this page, simply go to getbootstrap.com and then go into the Getting Started page. So I would recommend reading through this. It's very short and it explains how to get started with Bootstrap. So one of the things that we'll have to do is import the Bootstrap files into our HTML files. So Bootstrap, the only thing that Bootstrap is really is a CSS file and a JavaScript file. And they give our website some styling as well as some user interactivity. But really it's a bit more than that. Because with those CSS files and those JavaScript files, the flexibility and the power that they give us is very easy to use. So as you'll see once we get started with Bootstrap, you'll find that using Bootstrap is actually a matter of adding one attribute or two to the objects, our HTML objects. And that makes everything so fast and so easy to use. And yet, because they've worked on this for such a long time, and because of the way they've built it, using it is easy and the outcome is really nice. So this page is actually probably built using Bootstrap, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't. It would be slightly weird if the Bootstrap page was not built with Bootstrap, but nevertheless, it looks something like this anyway. So if we go into CSS, we see an explanation of how Bootstrap is built, and it's mobile first. That's one of the essentials. So what that means is it's meant to work, it's designed to work in mobile phones, and then it's designed to grow nicely into a desktop. The typography, the normalize, the containers, and things like that. The grid system is very important in Bootstrap. And what a grid system is essentially Bootstrap is divided into 12 columns, and then you can very easily decide how wide your elements are. So if this page was divided into 12 columns, you could say one of them occupies 6 and the other one occupies 6, and then they would appear side by side. So very easy to use, and we will explain everything as we go along. And then move on to components at the top. And here you can see all of the different things that Bootstrap gives you. One such thing is the glyph icons, the small icons that you can put beside menu items and things like that. It looks very pretty. And then all the styling for drop downs and for button groups. You can do things like paging. You can do things like having different colored drop downs very easily. You've got input groups, which are essentially these things here that look really nice in your websites and give users an affordance as to what things are. So for example, if you've got this, your user immediately knows that they're meant to put the first part of their email here, although this should be the correct latter part of their email. When you've got things like this, that immediately tells the user that they're meant to put some sort of currency in there. So very usable and very nice. You've got navigation bars such as tabs or these called pills. So you've got a lot of things in Bootstrap, and we're going to be using the ones that we require. And of course, you should read through this and understand all the different parts, or at least have an idea that they exist, so that when you come to creating your own websites, you know whether something exists or not. Anyway, so enough of me babbling on about Bootstrap. If you go into the Getting Started and then you copy the first and the last links, and then you go into PyCharm and put them in your base.html, and you want to put your main CSS file after the Bootstrap one, because in CSS it's important that your file comes after the Bootstrap one. Okay, so that and also the JavaScript one. Okay, so now we're using Bootstrap. It's really that simple, which means that we can begin using the different Bootstrap components. So if we go into our page and go into the login, you see that that's changed. Before, it didn't used to be like that. The fields were smaller, the button looked different, because Bootstrap has made it not Apple not Chrome only. So it's made it a bit more standard, and we can make it better, of course. If we go into the login.html, here we can modify the form to be fully Bootstrap. So if we go into the Bootstrap page and then click on CSS, we can see that forms are here. And then it gives us a really nice example as to how the forms are implemented and how you can add your forms there. So individual form controls automatically receive global styling, which is what's happened to ours. Ours is only a form, and Bootstrap already sees that it's a form and then applies some global styling to it. All textual input, text area, and select elements with form control, notice the full stop before, are set to width 100% by default, and wrap labels and controls in dot form group for optimum spacing. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that if we give this attribute to our input text area or select elements, then they will look like this. Their width would be 100% of their container. And then labels like this one will appear on top if they are in the form group class. So let's have a look at the form control class first. Simply go to your form and then find the input type like here. So here we can see they've got form, then they've got a div, and we're going to look at what that is in a moment, and then finally they've got their input type. And notice how the class is form control for all of them. That gives them some styling. So if we find our inputs, which are these two, and then type class equals form control, and then we go back into our site, notice that now they've changed substantially. Now, I'm not saying this looks any better, because it probably doesn't, because it still needs some more work. But now that has Bootstrap features to it. They are 100% of the width. They don't have any margins. The submit button, however, still is not looking like Bootstrap. So in order to make it look like Bootstrap, we actually need to change it slightly. It doesn't have to be an input of type submit. It has to be a button of type submit with these classes here. So I'm just going to copy this code and then go here and change that. Now if we go back to our site, notice how that now looks a bit different. Okay, so why do theirs look like that and ours looks like terrible? That's because they've got these form groups. And a form group essentially is a label and an input type. So the label gives some description as to what the input should contain, and we should have that in our login form. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a div. And a div is essentially a piece of content that occupies all the space sideways. So essentially a div is a block that occupies a full space from side to side and not from top to bottom. So you cannot place multiple divs one beside each other normally. You can do with Bootstrap, but that is essentially what a div is. The counterpart to a div is called a span, and a span is an inline element, not a block element. So you can place multiple spans one beside another normally. So div class is going to be form group. And then we will cut that and put it after the input type. And then we're going to do that again for the other input type. Okay. And now if we go back to our site, it probably won't look any different. Now it has some spacing in between the fields, but that's it. And finally, we can add a label. So let's go back here and see how they've done it. And notice how quite simply they've got a label for and then the ID of the field. And that is the way you make a label. So label for email. And then here we would be, say, email. And then another one for the password. Sorry, I can't spell. and then we will say password. Okay, go back to our site. And now that's starting to look a bit better. However, it's very wide, and this is not a particularly usable thing. So what to do is now group this content in another div. And this div is going to ensure that our content is not occupying 100% of the screen width, but that it is occupying only a specific amount. And the way we're going to do that is actually with CSS. So container, that already makes it slightly better. This is a Bootstrap class. If we give it the class Bootstrap, it makes it slightly better, but it's not particularly ideal because it's still too wide. So as well as container, we can give it another class, which can be, for example, login page form, and then we can go into our main CSS and do something with this login page form. Notice how it has a full stop before the attribute to mean that this is, a class. If it has the hash symbol, it's because it's an ID. And then what we're going to tell it is max width is going to be 480 pixels. See if that's any better. Now that's substantially smaller, and that looks a bit better as well. Okay, so now we've got a login form here, which looks substantially better than what it did before we implemented Bootstrap. And we're still missing a lot of things on our page. We're missing things like having a navigation bar at the top, having a footer at the bottom, and possibly having some sort of background for this form. But that's something that we'll get to eventually in future sections. We're not going to worry too much about it just now. Okay, so this is how we would do this form. And we can do exactly the same for the registration form. So I'm going to copy and paste, remembering to change auth login for auth register. And that's really everything we have to change. Notice, however, that the login page form class is still here, even though this is the registered page. So we should probably change it to page form. Change that to page form, and change your CSS file to page form as well. And now we've got the login looking like that, and the register looking like exactly the same. So that's not very ideal. Another thing, we can change the submit button. We can change the login submit button to say login, and the register button to say sign up. And now this says sign up, and the login page will say login. Okay, so say we wanted to make the button green to ensure that people feel like clicking it. Simply go to the Bootstrap and then find the green button, which will be up here in the components. Actually, will it be in the components? It will be down here in buttons, sorry. And here are the different types of button that we can have. So button default is the one we've got. We can use primary, success, info, warning, or danger. So let's use green, so success. Notice how ours says btn space btn-default. So this is one class, and this is another class. So this button type has two different classes. One of them is btn, the other one is btn-default. We're going to change btn-default for btn-success. And we are going to do that in both of our forms. And then when we go back, we can see that it is now green, and that's a lot better. So we can do a lot of things. We can move this button to the right, we can add the navigation bar, we can add a placeholder value on these fields, and there's a lot of things we can do, and I encourage you to play around with that. Try those things. Try to put a sample email and sample password as placeholders. Try to move the button to the right. Try to create a simple navigation bar that has your login and your registration pages. Do those things using Bootstrap, and you'll find that you'll quickly get acquainted with the way Bootstrap works and the sort of things you can do with it. So go ahead, play around with that, and then come back and we'll continue. So I'll see you in the next video.